Thank you. So I'm going to go ahead and call this work session to order on AO 2020-96, an omnibus ordinance of the Anchorage Assembly revising Anchorage Municipal Code Title 12, Taxation. Let's go ahead and start with a roll call, please.
Okay, Miss Allard. Mr. Constant.
Here.
Mr. Dunbar.
Here.
Ms. Kennedy. Ms. LaFrance.
Here.
Mr. Perez-Verdilla. Mr. Peterson.
Present.
Ms. Quinn Davidson.
Here.
Mr. Rivera.
Present.
Mr. Weddleton. Ms. Zolotel. I believe I do see Ms. Zolotel in the room. All right, you have a quorum, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. All right, so as usual, if assembly members want to get in the queue, please put yourself in the chat or text me if you can't access the chat. With that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to the administration for the presentation.
Yeah, thank you. This go ahead.
Yeah, this is through the chair. This is Alex Lipka. The assessor Jack Adamus has prepared and submitted a presentation that he's going to go through. And just as a reminder, this is a repeat or an update of the information that we shared with you a couple months ago. Again, the goals are equity across the municipality, and plus a few things that we'd like to do in anticipation of turning on the new computer automated mass appraisal system in the late 2021. So having said that, Jack is going to walk through this, and of course, any questions, feel free to ask.
Okay, yeah, thank you, Alex. So yeah, what I can do is maybe just share that presentation in case you don't have that handy to everybody. Let's see if I can do that here quickly. Okay, so you should be seeing my screen now, I'm hoping. And
Yep.
Great. And so yeah, this is going to be just a lot of this, what you're going to be seeing here is going to be very familiar with what we introduced several weeks ago. If anything, it's just really now a little bit more details as we have worked with it. It's obviously going in front of you, in front of the assembly now with more concrete information. And so now we can give some of those details with that. So having said that, I will just quickly go through this, and any questions, by all means, please ask. We will work to answer those. So just to refresh your memory, there's really 6 main components to what we're looking to do in this omnibus ordinance change. And it's mobile homes, it's aircraft, it's this 20K business exemption that we're looking to change, this personal property assessment returns, the property tax due dates, and the property tax refunds. And so I can go through each one of these again, but like I said before, we have a little bit more detail now that we have some concrete information. So the mobile home, so back to what Alex said too, again, the focus is the taxpayer equity. We're looking to try to have government efficiency. So we're looking through our municipal code. We're looking where maybe there are some things that were a little bit outdated, or just where we could have room for improvement. And again, that new CAMA system that we're implementing, we are going to be doing that here shortly too. So that was also something in mind. So the mobile homes, really there's not too much from what we originally proposed for that. We're looking to exempt all privately owned mobile homes under this ordinance. And what the difference is that the private will be exempt, but we'll continue to assess the mobile homes from the business side of it. We also did have in there, and we put in there some type of there's a rent increased restriction that we did, so that the mobile home courts can't just really crank up the increased cost with that. The benefits of this that we have here is that it does provide similar tax savings to allow these single-family homes. They have that $50,000 residential exemption, so a lot of these mobile homes, they're worth less than $300 and some $1,000, so they'll at least get a more commensurate nominal tax savings on that. The other thing is the increased assessment and tax collection efficiency. Sometimes these mobile homes are hard to follow, track down from the assessment as well as the taxation side of things.
So Jack, I'm going to stop you there. Looks like Mr. Dunbar has a question for us.
Thank you. Wait,
Go ahead, Mr.
are
Dunbar.
you running this meeting or is
Okay. I am
Right.
running it, but go ahead, Mr. Dunbar, if you wanted to ask your question.
yes? I don't think Alex meant anything by that. I'm just.
I did not mean anything ill will. I apologize.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Mr. CFO. So you said something there very briefly, and perhaps you're going on a little bit. You're going to go into this a little bit, Mr. Gadamis. But I mean, obviously, I think I have the most mobile homes in my district. There might be some controversy about that, but we have very large things here. But you mentioned something I hadn't really considered, which is, I certainly very much support this. But if these are they're mostly large mobile home parks. There's a chance that this could lead to an increase in the rents because, frankly, because the owners know that that they can't really. Most of the mobile homes aren't actually mobile at all. They can't be moved, and they'll know that these folks have a little bit more money in their pocket. So, can you explain to me how we're going to prevent this from being captured?
Yeah. So in the ordinance, we did do that, and I'm looking for it now, where exactly it is. But what we did do is we asked to limit that monthly space rent increase limitation on that. And so what we're looking to do, and it says, I quote, are prohibited from raising their monthly space rent by more than the average increase in the consumer price index for urban Alaska over the trailing 5 calendar years.
I'm sorry,
exactly what you were concerned, or what your question is exactly what we're trying to do with that section.
What could you point? And I apologize. I read through this last night, but I must have missed that. What section is that, or what page in the ordinance?
Yeah, no problem. That's 12.10.045B.
Okay.
Did you have anything else, Mr. Dunbar?
No, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Before you can continue, Mr. Gadamis, just want to note for the record, we've been joined by Ms. Kennedy, Ms. Allard, and Ms. Zalatel was with us from the start. So I have a couple of questions before you continue. So first I have Ms. Zalatel.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So the underlying property that mobile homes sit on will still be taxed, I believe. I just want to make sure I'm correct there. And then it would just be the actual mobile home as property, personal property, that would be exempt.
That's exactly correct. Yes. And then to maybe just to make clear and expand on that too, if you have a mobile home court and it's the mobile home owner owns 50 mobile homes and the underlying land, then those 50 mobile homes will be taxed because that's a business as well as the underlying land.
Can I restate that just to make sure I understood it, Mr. Chair?
Sure.
So if the mobile home landowner also owns the mobile homes as a business and rents them because businesses are not exempt, that individual would be taxed on the land plus the mobile homes as personal property because it's used for a business.
That is correct.
Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Kennedy?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm good. Ms. Zolotel got to my question. Thank you.
Thank you. Please continue, Mr. Gadamus.
Yeah, thank you. So just maybe to expand a little bit more after we were looking at this, just a little bit more detail for specifically with mobile homes is it's going to be about $78 million of assessed value that the mobile homes that would be exempted. So about $78 million right now is what the sum is of all privately owned mobile homes. It's about 0.2% of the total tax base. Just a really quick calculation. So roughly, the average home averaged at $360,000 for an assessed value home. About $13 extra in property tax that would be. Just a hair under 4,000 mobile homes is what the count is. And we already talked about that final point that mobile homes for businesses would still be assessed. So just a little more detail there. And if I'm not hearing anything, I guess I'll move on. The next thing that we're looking to do is the aircraft. Currently, what's going on with the aircraft is with the flat tax, and it's $75 for a single engine, $125 for 2 or more engines is what we currently do. This right now, what we have, this is for businesses as well as personally owned aircraft. And maybe I could just step back again that the proposed change is for non-regular scheduled business aircraft. So what we're looking to do is we're looking to actually change that up a little bit. We are first looking to just do non-regular scheduled business aircraft, and I use the word business as an emphasis, to pay tax based on the weight, and we would not include the personally owned aircraft. A couple of reasons for this. One, the step in this direction would allow us to be more commensurate with all the other property that is personally owned. For example, snow machines, we don't tax. A boat, we don't tax. So that would be more in line there. The other reason is this would bring us a little bit more in line with and closer to equity with other businesses that own maybe different types of assets, maybe, for example, machinery equipment for construction. So I do have a next slide here. And what we're looking to do with this aircraft proposed schedule is we have here, looking at the schedule, it'd be based on the weight of the aircraft. And so you can see here, the tax would range from the fee or the tax would range anywhere from $100 all the way up to $1,000. On the left, you can see that that's fixed wing, and then on the right, then we have your rotary helicopters on that. Again, just anywhere from $100 to $1,000. Based off of that, it is getting closer to equity. We're expecting this to be generally a net neutral revenue standpoint. So yes, we're losing the personally owned aircraft, but we're increasing the fees a little bit and hoping to be roughly net neutral on it. So I'm not sure if there's any questions on this.
I do have a question for you from
Yes.
Mr. Dunbar.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I know that we're always looking for, heuristics and ways to simplify, but why pounds as opposed to assessed value? Because it doesn't seem hard to imagine a plane that is lighter but is significantly more expensive, precisely because it's lighter, and perhaps an older plane might be a little bit heavier, but significantly cheaper.
It's a good question. I think there's a couple of reasons, and we've talked about this, or we've talked internally about this a little bit. So let me just maybe share a couple things on that. The first is I've heard it from multiple people, including the aircraft industry themselves. You could have the same year airplane, so 1970 Cessna, 208 or something, and you could have it pretty basic with no avionics, and maybe it's worth $50,000-$60,000. Then you could have something that's completely decked out, has the latest avionics, and you're looking at $500,000 or even more for something like that. So when you're looking at from a ad valorem perspective, it can be rather challenging to get a accurate and equitable assessment from that respect. I think also too, I haven't really talked, and then the other kind of other question you have based on the weight, I haven't really talked too much about the actual weight and if there is a correlation with the aircraft weight with the age of the aircraft. I don't know. I guess my impression with aircraft generally is that they run the same models for quite a few years, if not decades. Like a King Air can be pretty old, for example. So I can't fully answer that second part of your question.
No worries. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Ms. Zolotel?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I'm having some issues with using a weight calculation because it seems like aircraft would be something, as Mr. Dunbar pointed out, that would be somewhat easy to figure out its value, particularly if they're insured. So I need a little bit more as to why it's weight. It just seems like such a disconnected way to assess this particular type of property versus using valuation for nearly everything else.
Yeah, I think so. Just to maybe, just backstep or backpedal a little bit. Right now the fee is $75 or $75 for single, $125 for a 2 or more engine, and so we really try to strike a middle balance. Well, again, kind of getting a system that is somewhat efficient and simplified. If we did do something with ad valorem tax, I think one of the first things that you would probably hear is the aircraft industry, saying what that tax liability could be. Again, if you're looking at something that's again a decked out Cessna 208, for example, which has they're in the range between the 4,000 and 6,000 a weight. It could be anywhere up to, again, maybe $630,000, for example. They're going to be paying about $10,000 in taxes then. Compare that to $300 that we're proposing. So yes, I do understand that the weight is certainly to some degree a disconnect or a step away from ad valorem tax. But the general notion is that, yeah, as you get a heavier aircraft, it is going to be generally more. And when we did look at the value of that, it does reasonably follow, the weight is reasonably correlated with that assessed value.
Through the chair, this is Alex Lipka. I guess I'd add two things to what the assessor has said. One, this was modeled on an existing tax structure that's used on the Kenai Peninsula and is one that has been accepted by the industry. This assembly is probably not familiar with the history of the current tax structure, which, to put it mildly, is kind of modest in relation to the value of these planes. That is a result of a fairly significant opposition to, I think, what may have been proposed back then of an ad valorem tax. So I think what Jack's trying to say is this is a way to provide individual owners, non-commercial owners, with equitable treatment, but it's also a way to tax businesses in an amount that we believe is acceptable and will be revenue neutral to what we're trying to accomplish, if that helps.
Thank you. Next, I have Ms. Kennedy.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess I want a little more clarification on exactly who this particular tax goes against, because you were talking about the single versus double engine. So I don't think that we're doing that anymore. That would be, we would do away with that and move basically into the weight classes. So I was wondering if we're talking about weight, I mean, obviously there's potential, depending on the size of the airplane, to generate a certain amount of income based on that size of that airplane. So I can see where weight could be tied in to a plane's ability or a business's ability to generate income. I mean, a small plane, maybe you can have only one passenger in that small plane, but a larger plane, which weighs more, you can either carry a bigger payload in terms of passengers or materials of some sort. So there's that ability to generate income from the use of that plane. So are we speaking specifically about business related planes here? Are we talking about aircraft that is used as equipment inventory for a business? Or are we still talking about privately owned non-business? Thanks.
Yeah, I can. Yeah, through the chair, I can answer that. This is Jack. So this is what we're proposing to do is go away from taxing private airplane owners, so they wouldn't have to do anything. So this would be only for businesses.
Okay, well, that's what I thought. But so again, was there any consideration in terms of the value of the craft to be related to its ability to generate revenue in that business? Because you can certainly fly around, you can fly one person around in a pretty fancy and highly valued plane. But at the same time, you can probably get a great deal of payload into a smaller plane with only a pilot and actually generate more income out of that. So anyway, I was just kind of seeing if there was any conversation about how the tax could be correlated to the plane's ability to actually generate income for the business. Thanks.
Yeah, we weren't looking at it from a perspective of potential income that the plane could generate. I would just thinking and talking out loud here, my gut was probably commensurate with what you're throwing out there for an idea that, yeah, as you get a larger airplane, that they would most likely generate more income with that. Larger airplanes tend to be heavier, and like I said before, we did look into it, and the weight does seem to be reasonably correlated with the value of the airplanes as well.
Okay, well, that's good. If there could be a direct, I guess, correlation made with the weight of the airplane to its ability to benefit the business, then this tax structure then makes sense. Thanks.
Thanks. Mr. Constant?
Thank you. Ms. Aldell had brought up briefly the idea of using insurance kind of as a way to determine values. And I just wanted to put into the record again that for the most part, you see very little compliance by airplane operators for insurance. And maybe the businesses are somewhat different, but for the most part, private pilots don't insure their planes. I think of the 7 planes that have fallen out of the sky into Fairview, 0 of them had insurance. So just as a sidebar.
Thank you. And Mr. Weddleton, just to clarify, you want to speak at the end of all of the slides?
Yeah, that would be fine. At the end, thanks.
Okay, got it. I'll keep you at the end. All right, go ahead, Mr. Gadamus.
Okay. Well, if we have nothing else, then I will get into the property business exemption. And so I think there was a few questions on this before. This one is rather simple from the concept of what we're looking to do. All we're looking to do is increase the personal property business exemption from $20,000 to the first $50,000 of property being exempt. one of the things you'll see later down in my slides is a comparison to what happened in 2008, where we increased the residential exemption from 10% up to $20,000 to 20% up to $50,000. So we're just trying to we were trying to be mindful of that and be equitable and commensurate with that residential exemption. And further, one of the discussions that's been going around is just looking to try to extend a little bit more tax relief to the businesses. And I do have a little bit of detail on this as well. So similar to the mobile homes, a couple of bullet points to know: about $82 million of assessed value, if we did increase this, would be exempt. And again, that's right around 0.2% of the total tax base. The savings could be up to $510 for businesses. The average home, again, about $360,000 home, would be about $14 extra in property tax. Again, rough estimate. And finally, about 700. So we currently have about almost 3,300. You can see 33,288 businesses total. About 700 businesses would no longer have to file. And that's because they'll be then below the $50,000 exemption rate. And so these are generally going to be your smaller mom and pop businesses and shops. A lot of these people, I'm guessing, probably don't have a sophisticated accountant to help them with that. So we also were mindful of that, and we're hoping that that would at least help some of those smaller businesses with some of those burdens with that. So if there's, I don't know if there's any questions on that. I do have on the next slide here, maybe just to do a comparison of what happened in 2008.
I do have a couple of questions. Mr. Dunbar?
Thank you, Mr. Rivera. And so I'd asked this the last time you guys presented this stuff last week, and it came up when we increased that exemption from 20,000 to 50,000 a few years ago, that benefit did not accrue to renters in multifamily homes or units. And you know, in this case as well, it's $14 for the average home. Is there any calculation to, you know, the large apartment complexes, for example, that are on B3 zoning or some other kind of high density zoning? What additional property taxes they would be facing? Because my assumption is that will be passed on to renters.
Yeah, it'd be passed on to renters. It'd be basically all of real property. So if you did, for example, I could maybe just pull up my calculator here and just do a quick off the calendar. CLC. So we could get that number for you with just maybe what that would be. But whatever the tax is, so let's say it's $1 million for a apartment that they have, and the mill rate is in tax district 1, so they pay roughly this last year $1 million apartment, about $17,000 in that. And so basically all it would be is about 0.2% increase in tax. Again, that's ceteris paribus, holding all things constant. And I think we all know that that doesn't always happen. No,
you know, I got it. I can do it. I can do it in my head. But also, I sent an email to you via Mr. Falsey that I think will be arriving. So if you just have that by Tuesday, I would appreciate it. But I mean, what you're saying here is that you know, $14 per 360,000. So you know, if you had $1 million apartment complex, it should be, you know, 3 times that roughly.
Roughly, yeah.
And then you spread that throughout the unit, so it'd still be a relatively small number. Thank you, Mr. Gademis.
Thank you. Ms. Zolotel?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So what is the increase to property taxes with all of these different changes being proposed? And the reason I ask is we had this come up in community council last night, frankly, is that in the time of COVID, one of the things we absolutely can't do is any kind of property tax relief. And here we're looking at ways to help out different select groups, but it's going to ultimately increase property taxes. So I'd like to know what that overall increase is, because we're still stuck with this group who may not qualify for any of the other COVID relief because they can still eke out their mortgage, but their property taxes are going up because of things like this. And then we are going to have an additional property tax increase coming with school bond debt reimbursement obligations. So I'd like to know the full amount this will raise property taxes on the average home.
Yeah, sure. Through the chair. So there's only two of the proposed changes that would be looking to shift property tax. And it's the $50,000 business exemption and it's the mobile homes. So add in the roughly $13 is what we were thinking for yours, and the $13 plus $14. So for a $360,000 home, it'd be roughly about $27 is what we're looking for ballpark total.
Thanks.
Thanks. Please continue.
Okay. So yeah, I just wanted to maybe just have this slide because I think this was also a question, and really just looking at what happened with 2008 to put things in, in 2018 when we increased the residential exemption, to just give a comparison of what's going on here. So most of our tax base is single family homes. And so when we did increase that residential exemption, it did increase the exempt value by about $1.3 billion is what we saw. You can see that chart at the bottom there. It's about 3%, 3.8% of the tax base. And for comparisons, you can see that we're looking for these to increase the exempt value for mobile homes by about 78 million, and that 50K personal property exemption, it was about $82 million. So again, you can see that the difference between that. The other thing to be mindful of back in 2018 when this all happened, at the same time there was the gas tax that was implemented. And this did offset that 3.8% shift, and that reduced to, as you can see, that third bullet point there, with the gas tax, there was a 1.2% increase to properties with residential exemption. So what we're looking to do now is, I would say, significantly less than what happened in 2018. And if there's no other questions, I can move on. So the next thing, if my computer lets me here, is I'm going to talk a little bit about this personal property filing. So last time we came and we proposed that we'd like to have a differentiation between a late filer for personal property and a non-filer, someone that doesn't file at all. And so we are proposing to have a 10% for the late filing to keep that the same, but then have a 20% penalty for non-filer. One of the questions that happened last time during the assembly workshop was, how are we going to differentiate and when are we going to define what a non-filer is versus a late filer? So what I could do on the next slide here, I do have a little timeline of what we're thinking to do. So if I'm a business owner and I'm looking to file for tax year 2022, I have from January all the way up to April 30th, plus a 7-day grace period to file timely. So that's where you can see the first thing there at the top. And then if I miss that, so if I'm 7 days past that deadline, and then I file, my window to file late then is from May to about beginning of September. And then what will happen is what we have, how we defined it basically in the code is that 30 days prior to the billing. And so typically that's going to be September 1st is when that 30 days prior to, we will then issue an involuntary filing on a business owner that we think owns property and just hasn't filed. Again, we would put that 20% penalty on there, as you see in that third bullet point or third thing. And then we were looking at this, and there's two goals here that we want to do. We want to differentiate between a late filer and a non-filer, but we also want to, as assessors, we want to get things accurate and correct. So we still want to give the carrot, or we still want to give people an incentive to file, even if it is late. And we don't really want to actually, at the end of the day, penalize business owners, or at least try to mitigate that. So what we did do is we also created this window, as you see at the bottom here, where you can amend all the way up to 1 year within the original due date of the filing. So basically you can see that window is from about September all the way up to about April 30th. If you do file and you do amend, the penalty will go from 20 down to 10%. So I hope this maybe helps you understand what we're looking to do with this proposed change. Are there any questions?
I don't see any right now.
Okay. With that, we'll maybe move on here. We also have a property tax due date here. So this is the same slide as you've seen before. I don't recall there being too many questions on that. Largely what we're looking to do for this real property tax due date is just change it to the end of the month, and instead of what it is now. Right now it's June 15th and August 15th respectively. And we're looking to just do it then again, for example, June 30th and August 31st. And then I'm sure Dan Moore could pipe up if there's any questions with anything, but we're looking, what would happen is the accrual of interest would then be charged on the first day of the month following that due date. And this is going to be getting closer and similar to most of our other things where we're changing it to the end of the month for due dates. Personal property right now is at the end of the month as well. So a couple of things that could be helpful is it does provide additional time, and it also makes the interest calculation the same, like I said, for real property and personal property. So, and if there's no questions, I'll keep moving on. Finally, this is the last slide. We have the property tax refunds. And this one, what we're just looking to do is just allow taxpayers to transfer money between accounts. Right now, we don't allow that. And so I know that there has been frustration. It does also create additional paperwork at our end as well. And so we are looking to, as you can see, the proposed allow transfers of overpayment on one parcel that we could just simply move it over onto another unpaid balance. And that is assuming that the owner is identified and the owner does approve for all these parcels and for that transfer of money. So it will help us improve our accuracy, our timeliness with everything and our account information on that. Again, it reduces paperwork and volume for the processing on our end as well as the taxpayer's end. And it also does create a little bit of efficiency. And that's the end for everything. I think through the chair, I think there was a question that Weddleton had at the end too.
Thanks. Yeah, I have a few folks in the queue now. Thank you so much for the presentation. So go ahead and start with Mr. Weddleton.
Okay, I've got a couple points, and one is I guess a yes, no, and that's, at the end of the day, this is revenue neutral for the city. Is that correct?
It's close to revenue neutral. I do have the the first year we would see maybe about a $15,000 increase in revenue, but in the big scheme of things, we were trying to go that direction.
Well, I thought with the tax cap, it's a cap. We can't go over it unless it's, the formula.
Oh, yes, you're right. Well, I think some of this might be outside the tax cap. So one of the things that we have, and this maybe is more of a legal question, we have the increase in fees from the 10% to increase to 20% for the involuntary filing. So I think we would see some increase in the revenue there. Again, we're hoping to reduce that as time goes along. And then the other thing too is the first year, we will probably lose money when we, due to interest, for the tax due date. When we change it, we push it back about 2 weeks. We'll probably lose some earned interest on both the first and second half of the tax due dates.
Okay, so Mr. Chair, if I could continue a bit. So on the cap on the rent on the mobile home spaces, at kind of the 5-year rolling average, that's a problem because the tax cap goes up based on inflation, similar to that. I don't remember if it's a 5-year rolling average or not, but roughly that, plus increase in population, which we haven't had recently, but typically do, plus the value of new construction. So people who own those mobile home spaces will be facing increases in costs that are higher than what they're allowed to increase the rent. So I guess that's more of a comment, but I just don't think that aspect is reasonable. And you did not, something that I've actually been concerned of for many, many years, 34 probably, is on page 10 in new section E, methods to be used to assess business inventories. And it doesn't line up with any other thing we do to value inventory in business. It's very unusual. And I wonder if you have ever considered just aligning it with what we all do for our federal taxes. That's very well spelled out in how we value inventory. And, we've already done it. We don't have to do it 2 different ways. So that's kind of broadly. And then in E1, you talk about how a retail merchant would do it, and it's a little vague. Then in 2, a wholesale merchant's inventory shall be valued the same as for retail merchants. And that leaves open the question, same as use the same dollar values, or do you mean use the same methods? And it's not clear at all there. But the cost of inventory for a wholesaler is obviously going to be much less than for a retailer. And section 3 and 4 there are also puzzling. In 4, it says you use a new phrase all of a sudden, business inventories. Is that different than inventory in the previous 3 sections? So I know you haven't really addressed that in this, but from my point of view, I think I might. It needs fixing.
Yeah, I think through the chair, I don't think I have really too much for comments on that right now. I think what we are looking at least for subsection 2 on that, where we're looking at value the same as retail merchants, I think we're looking at from the methodology being the same there, because largely what we're looking at is just acquisition cost for a lot of things. So the acquisition cost for a wholesaler merchant might be different from a retail merchant, I'm assuming. And we would like to be able to, and we should be able to recognize that.
Yeah, and in 4, and I've been wholesaler and retailer for decades and decades, and in number 4, shall be valued by examining the form, location, quantity, acquisition source, and probable purchaser. Leaves me 100% baffled in what that means. So that's probably more of a comment,
Thank you.
but we need to work on
Yeah.
this at some point.
Great. That sounds great. Thanks. Next, I have Miss Kennedy.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I wanted to go back a little bit and talk about the mobile home parks as well. I certainly understand. I mean, I think it's great to exempt the basically the inventory tax, if you will, on the mobile home itself. But I am a little concerned about what might be happening with mobile home parks in general. And I was wondering if you'd had any discussion with some of the owners of some of these parks. The one I have out in Chugiak is only has about 40 families in it right now, but the owner of the property there, the owner of the business, has basically given notice to all of their mobile home leasers in that mobile home park that they will be closing down by, I think it's the end of May next year. So they've all basically been given eviction notices. So I was wondering if you had had any conversations with mobile home park owners and got a sense of what maybe is happening in that world of mobile home leasing when you were talking about these tax changes. Thanks.
Yeah, through the chair, I can say that for this specifically with some of the code changes that we've done, we have not specifically reached out to the mobile home court owners. Historically, we did reach out to and have discussions with some of these mobile home court owners just from a more valuation process. And more specifically, we've had a couple during the appeal process looking at things with everything. So I do recognize that, yes, there seems to be anecdotally a trend for these businesses to move away from these mobile home courts. I can tell you from our perspective, we do every year take a look at these mobile home courts, and we do value them based on the income approach, and they do seem to have a highest and best use of the property does often seem to be what they're doing, which is the current use of the mobile home court. But again, we are seeing that trend, and I don't know exactly why we're seeing that trend. So I can't expand that.
Okay, well, thank you. And maybe I need to do some research too, but I am kind of concerned about what might be happening in that world. And I certainly want to make sure that things that we're doing with the tax structure isn't trying to push people over the edge then. So thanks.
Thank you. Ms. Zolotel?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My question is way more general, and it is, what municipal attorney has been working on this with Dean out that might be able to assist in preparing some documents for Tuesday night? Thanks.
Yeah, we were working briefly with, at least we had some discussions about whether we wanted to change the effective date for the business exemption to tax year 2021 instead of 2022, and we were working with Jessica on that question. So
let me just check in. So it either Ms. Ennis or Ms. Vogel, are you on with us right now? Oh, well, actually, Jessica, I see you here with us. Is that okay? Do you need to get approval from Ms. Vogel or Ms. Ennis for that?
Through the chair, that's not a problem. If there's questions, they can be sent to me, Jessica Willoughby.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, let me just go back to the queue. Mr. Dunbar, if you can go ahead and just read that comment, thanks.
Yeah, with regard to the mobile home parks in East Anchorage, we've had several that were redeveloped into condos or traditional homes or some other kinds of affordable housing in the case of Cook Inlet Housing Authority. There have also been some attempts to do so that fell through. I think in general, the recognition among some property developers is you can make more money doing other things. And that's been the case for a while.
Thanks. Mr. Peterson?
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. And my question is, has the property that these mobile home parks sit on, has that been increasing in value at a regular rate, or has it gone up more quickly more recently? Or has the value stayed the same, or does it depend on which trailer park you were looking at? Thank you.
Yeah, through the chair, I don't have that information right offhand with me. I can say that we've historically, the last several years, we've been relatively flat with pretty much all commercial land. Like I said before, we do often value the mobile home parks on an income approach. And so that would probably then reflect how they're doing from a annual basis. So if they're doing a little bit better, that income approach might push up their value a little bit. So that might help. If you do want a little bit more detailed answer, I'm sure we can be happy to get back to you and give you maybe a 3-4 year history on some of these mobile home parks.
I would appreciate that. Thank you.
We can do that.
Thank you. Ms. Kennedy?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Sorry, slow buttons. First of all, I thank Mr. Peterson for asking that question, and I look forward to some more of that information that will be coming. And I wanted to comment on Mr. Dunbar's comment, and I certainly think that there are times when obviously property owners decide what's the best use of their property. But I just wanted to comment that the one out in Chugiak Forest Park has been experiencing such dramatic flooding in the wintertime. You probably even saw on the news where they had a significant number of cars that actually got frozen to the ground. So there are just some real issues with having the funding to be able to handle and maintain some of the challenges in that particular park. So I guess I just wanted to clarify that in some cases they just have very expensive challenges to deal with in some of the parks. So it's not always about the owner just making more money. But anyway, just wanted to make that comment. Thank you.
Thank you. We're getting close to the end of our time. We have a few minutes left. Is there any other discussion? Any other questions or comments? Just to repeat, it sounds like at least one assembly member, if not more, might be working on amendments. So for this ordinance, if you have any amendments you'd like to work on, you can do that with Jessica Willoughby in the Department of Law. All right, not hearing anything else, then I want to thank Mr. Slivka and Mr. Gadamus for the presentation and answering all of the questions. I'm going to go ahead and close this work session, and we will see everyone again at 3:25.
Thank you.